Planet of Evil is another solid entry in Tom Baker's second season as the Doctor, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. One thing this story offers us which is slightly different to what has come before is the dynamic of just the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane. Because Harry had been around up until this one, we previously had a little bit of a different dynamic with three people traveling in the TARDIS, and what we get from this story is a little bit different. I can't definitively say if it's better, but I'm definitely really enjoying it. One of the things that makes this story stand out to me is its unique style. It feels like another distinct story in this Hinchcliffe era of Doctor Who. It has some quite dark elements within it, and of course the actual setting of this alien forest on Zeta Minor is quite dark and atmospheric, which if you've been watching these reviews, you probably know that's right up my alley. The atmosphere of this story is very important to me, and this forest really contributes to that. And by the way, the set really looks quite good. The forest looks much more expensive than you would usually get from Classic Who, in that it just looks great, and I thought they did an excellent job of utilizing this space. Interestingly, for the actual forest scenes, they were filming in a different location than usual, and because of just the way the set was constructed, they weren't able to capture the audio live like they normally would, so lots had to be dubbed in post. For most of it, I didn't notice, but there was one part that stood out to me in episode 1.
You don't know where we are.
Oh, with any luck, we're near enough to reach whoever it is.
That is not what I meant.
Before, whatever it was has made them transmit the call overwhelms them. That is, if we're not too late already.
I mean, what planet?
Oh, it's a weak signal. Allowing for refractive interference from the time warp. Can you move any faster?
I'm doing the best I can.
It really didn't bother me much, but it's a kind of interesting thing about the production of the story that is worth taking note of.
I'm doing the best I can.
The actual villain towards the beginning of this one is just this creature, if I'm allowed to call it that, and it's quite interesting to me because the creature itself is rather simple. It's just this large mass that you can only kind of see. And I'm sure they just used some green screen or whatever to make this creature show up as it did. And as said, it is relatively basic, but it just works for me. It's this entity that comes up to characters, kills them, and leaves. It's pretty early on in the story when we do first see the creature kill someone, and this ties into the darker elements of this story, because it just creeps up on people, kills them, and leaves their skeletons behind. And that really worked for me. It's honestly quite simplistic, but very effective. And that holds true across the story on a broader scale. It's not particularly complicated in any way, but what it's doing is entertaining to watch and is presented in an engaging way. So we have a couple of key groups in this one. There's a group that has been on Zeta Minor for some time, and there is a military group coming down to the planet to join them. Additionally, we also have our main TARDIS crew minus Harry Sullivan, and the villain of the piece that was already located on the planet. And at first, I wasn't as interested in the human characters. For one thing, the spaceship doesn't have the atmosphere that we have on the planet, so stylistically it is a bit bland by comparison, but the further into this story we got, the more engaged I was by the actual story itself as a whole, including the humans arriving on the planet and the ones that were already present. Jumping back to our characters, I really enjoy the Doctor and Sarah Jane together. I think they're really a fantastic TARDIS duo. Obviously, Sarah Jane is one of the better known classic companions. I think definitely the most well known actually. And I totally get why she gets so much love from Doctor Who fans because she's just so much fun. I love her chemistry with the Doctor. That is something I find to be very important in a companion. Being able to have some kind of a unique dynamic that's fun to watch. And these two really do have that. I think Sarah Jane doesn't get a lot to do in this one, not as much as she usually does. Generally, she ends up getting split up from the Doctor and doing stuff on her own. It's like a running theme for her character that she gets split up from him, at least for a little bit. And that does happen. She does get some stuff to do in the story and is involved, but it's perhaps just a little bit less than I would have liked to have seen from her. I enjoy just seeing these characters go on their little adventures, get caught up in some drama, and have a lot of fun together.
What's gone wrong this time?
Nothing at all. What makes you think something's gone wrong?
Because you always get rude when you're trying to cover up a mistake.
Nothing of consequence. Slight overshoot, easily rectified.
Come on, where are we?
We've come out of the time vortex the wrong point, that's all. A few years too late.
How many?
30,000.
And Tom Baker, I'll reiterate what I have said before in saying that I really enjoy the balance he strikes of being able to take these dangerous situations seriously, while also being able to turn around and bring his signature smile and make you laugh. I don't have much more to add, really. He's great as always, and him and Sarah Jane are wonderful together. Also, the Doctor has a little bit of a costume change in this story. I don't know whether I prefer it to his previous outfit, but I definitely really like it. One of the things this one actually does quite well is continually move forward and progress the story in ways that don't feel repetitive. It does quite a few interesting things that either shake up the story or just add a new element to what's going on, and that helps in preventing this one from getting old, as it does last for a good hour and a half like many of the stories from this era. I want to talk a bit more about the things this story does to keep the audience engaged, but I'm going to get a decent amount into spoiler territory, so feel free to skip to the time as shown on screen to avoid those spoilers, and with that said, let's continue. As I said, this one does manage to change up what it's doing enough throughout to keep it quite interesting. At first, we have this really simple villain in the form of this creature that just goes around killing people. It's not entirely clear why it does, but it does. And that works for the focus in this story that the creature gets, but I don't think it would have worked for an entire serial. And I think it was a wise choice to shake things up by introducing the new element of the antimatter, which we'll get to in a second. I think it's at the start of episode 3 when we see Tom Baker actually fall down into this basically pool of void that the entity seems to live in, and the cliffhanger itself is...
No!
fine, but what we get after with the Doctor in this void where he learns more about the creature's attacks is honestly rather interesting and engaging, if ultimately a little bit goofy as well. So this worked well for me and led into the next threat of our episode in the form of the antimatter and Sorensen. One of the things the Doctor found out was that they actually needed to leave the antimatter on the planet in order to escape, and because they failed to do that, when the humans and our companions attempt to escape in part 3, they find that they can't. And we also see the further dangers of this antimatter through the character of Sorensen, who has become pretty obsessed with utilizing its powers, and finds that prolonged exposure to it actually turns him into a beast. He basically becomes a werewolf because of the antimatter, and he has to drink this substance, whatever it is, to turn back into his normal form. The creature that he turns into is actually called the Anti-Man. Okay, I know it's kind of silly, but it's also a little bit creepy in a really fun and entertaining way. It's interesting to watch the story explore something different as it gets into the second half. It's a little bit reminiscent of the arc in space from season 12 in terms of his transformation and body horror, but it's also doing its own thing and approaching it from a unique angle. Well, at least a different angle. This isn't entirely specific to part 3, as Sorensen is really the primary threat in the final part, but in a little bit of a different and ultimately less interesting kind of way, because the antimatter ends up making him multiply into a bunch of different anti-men, which are much closer to the original threat from the first half of the story, and I don't know, it's just not as interesting to watch. It really isn't bad, and it doesn't take up the entire fourth part, but it's not my favorite thing. There was also this character of Salamar, who was one of these more over-the-top Classic Who characters, and he was fine. I get why the writers used him to add more conflict in this story, but for me, he was just a bit of a shouty character that got in the way, as opposed to being any kind of a threatening or intriguing villain. So, yeah, not the best. This is a pretty small thing, but I do really kind of love the cliffhanger to part 3. It ends with the Doctor and Sarah Jane literally getting shot into space, and I just love the way it's presented. It's a bit hard to describe, but there's something about them just being thrown out in this very simple and kind of elegant manner that makes it a bit more of a unique cliffhanger, and I just really dug that. The resolution is pretty much exactly what you would expect. Somebody just pulls the lever to save them, but at the least, there was a fabricated story reason for that to be able to happen, so it could have been handled worse. Overall, I thought this was a really solid and engaging story that feels very fitting in this new era under Philip Hinchcliffe as the producer, and with Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen as our delightful leads. I enjoyed the atmosphere that we got towards the beginning of this serial, and appreciated how this one was able to keep me engaged throughout all 4 parts by adding new elements and changing up what was being presented in new and interesting ways. I found this to be another good entry for Doctor Who, and I'm going to give Planet of Evil a rating of 8.25 out of 10. Well, that does it for this review. Be sure to let me know what your thoughts on this story are down below if you feel like doing so. I'm not anticipating most of you to have enjoyed this one as much as I did, but regardless, I'm curious as to what you have to say if you feel like sharing. And that's all for today, folks. I hope to see you around soon for my review of Pyramids of Mars. Very much a fan favorite Doctor Who story. That will be out this upcoming Sunday, but if I don't see you for that one, that's absolutely okay. Just know that I appreciate you joining me for this review, and with that said, thank you very much for watching. Take care, and have a lovely week.